This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Aid agencies warn new sanctions on Mali risk plunging millions into a humanitarian crisis. Tonga struggles with the tsunami's aftermath as countries rush to bring in life-saving supplies. And spotlight on children affected by insecurity in parts of northern Nigeria. This is Africa Live. Hello and thank you for joining us. I'm Peninah Karibe with me in studio with a sneak peek of what's coming up in business news as Uche.
Thanks, Peninah. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. Oil prices at a 7-year high as an outage in Turkey tightens supply. And the cost of living in South Africa rises to a near 5-year high at a rate of 5.9%. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, back to you, Peninah.
Thank you, Uche. 13 non-governmental organizations are pleading with the international community for the protection of Malians. This comes after the European Union announced last week that it would support the West African regional bloc, ECOWAS, in implementing collective sanctions against Mali. The country's interim government, led by Colonel Assimi Goïta, triggered these sanctions by shelving democratic elections scheduled for February. Goïta has been in power since May last year after a military junta ousted late President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. Keïta was overthrown for alleged mismanagement of the country and the insurgency in Mali's north. Among sanctions imposed by ECOWAS include trade embargoes, cutting off financial aid, freezing state assets and closing borders. The 13 NGOs are urging the international community, including the US, France, ECOWAS and European Union, to be mindful of citizens to avoid a humanitarian crisis. So let's bring in Hannah Gibbon, Deputy Regional Director for West Africa International Programs at the International Rescue Committee. Thank you very much, Hannah, for joining us. So we know 30 non-governmental organizations are pleading with the international community for the protection of Malians. Can you tell us more about the impact of the collective sanctions against Mali?
Yes, good afternoon. So the humanitarian situation in Mali is already complicated. We are concerned about the impact of the sanctions on the population, of whom 1/3 rely on humanitarian assistance. Already we can see that the activities of local organizations, basic social services, are likely to be disrupted due to the lack of liquidity. We're expecting food prices, non-food item prices to soar. Already we're hearing anecdotal reports of price escalations of up to 25%. So there are also concerns of potential fuel shortages. Now, as you know, Mali is a cash economy, and these financial sanctions are expected to have an almost immediate crippling impact. With the closure of the central bank in Mali, it will be soon difficult for the population to access cash. For us as humanitarian organizations who are there to support the vulnerable populations, we're seeing immediate effects on the movement of our colleagues who are stuck out of country, colleagues who cannot deploy to support the Malian population. For example, one of our partner organizations has already 7 staff who are affected by this. And indeed, there are colleagues who are waiting for shipment of medical supplies to treat malnourished children in Mali.
Right, so you've talked about a vulnerable population. You've mentioned about a need for food and fuel. Talk to us more about some of the humanitarian needs that Malians at the moment have.
Indeed, in Mali, we see that there are more than 7.5 million people. So that's about 1/3 of the country's population who are in need of humanitarian assistance. The population of Mali currently faces the worst food security crisis that we've seen in the last 10 years. We're seeing that 1.2 million Malians are facing food shortages. Some 70% of the food in Mali is actually imported, and Mali is strongly dependent on external assistance to finance basic social services. So, for example, the donor community covered 33% of total health expenditure in 2019. Those are some of the needs right now in Mali.
All right, Hannah, we appreciate that. Thank you very much for your time. Hannah Gibbon joining us live via Zoom from Dakar in Senegal. Now, Sudanese military leader Abdel Fattah al-Burhan has formed a committee to investigate the deaths of 7 protesters killed on Monday. This brings the total death toll to more than 70 since protests began last October. The demonstrations were sparked by the dissolution of the Sovereignty Council and ministers and the declaration of a state of emergency in the country. They have been characterized by mass injuries and deaths of civilians. Sudan's police has come out in defense of its officers, saying minimal force was applied during the protests. Analysts say mistrust between civilian groups and government forces could be a major obstacle for the investigation committee. Chad has released 22 rebels and political dissidents following an amnesty law passed in November last year. Jailed for treason, the prisoners were freed as a precondition to a national dialogue scheduled for February 15th. CGTN's Wanja Mungai has the story.
It's freedom at last for the 22 inmates held at Klezoum prison near the capital, Jamena. They're among the nearly 300 convicted detainees granted amnesty by President Mahamat Idris Deby Itno in November last year. Their release came as a demand from opposition parties invited to join a roundtable for national dialogue.
Prior to the inclusive national dialogue that is currently in preparation, and in order to allow all the sons and daughters of Chad to participate, the country's highest authority have decided to grant amnesty to compatriots for offences against the integrity of the state for the offences of opinion.
In addition to those convicted for rebellion, presidents of the courts of appeal have been instructed to release detainees who served long-term jails without trial. The 22 released prisoners, however, decry that some of their peers are still behind bars.
Only 22 of us have been released. Others are still inside, and that worries us. We don't know if the Transitional Military Council will be able to release them in the next few days. That's our concern at the moment.
The Justice Minister maintains that all inmates deserving amnesty at Klezoum prison have been released and suspects others have escaped.
Of the 44 detainees concerned by the Law 7, 22 have been identified as being present at the Klezoum prison and correctional facility. Consequently, they will benefit from the effects of this law. 44 divided by 2 makes 22. It means that 22 are not present today.
Despite the controversy surrounding the release of inmates, the upcoming national dialogue in mid-February is hoped to forge a way forward for peace and stability in Chad. Wanja Mungai, CGTN.
Police in the Democratic Republic of Congo have arrested 2 men in connection with the killing of an Italian ambassador and 2 other men he was traveling with last year. Ambassador Luca Atanasio was killed along with his bodyguard and driver near the eastern city of Goma last February. CGTN's Chris Chamringa has more from Kinshasa.
Nearly a year after the attack took place, 2 men have been charged with killing the Italian ambassador to the DRC. But the police have said the prime suspect, a man named only as Aspirant, is still on the run and have appealed for information to help catch him. It's alleged that the 2 men who have been arrested killed the ambassador after they failed in their attempt to kidnap him. Police claim the plan was to demand a ransom of $1 million. Ambassador Luca Atanasio died in February last year after his convoy was attacked by gunmen near the eastern town of Kanyamahoro. His bodyguard and driver were also killed in the attack. A statement issued by the World Food Programme said the ambassador and his team were traveling from the eastern city of Goma to visit a school feeding program in Rutshuru. Several rebel groups are reported to operate in that area. Authorities had previously cleared the road for travel without security escorts. Last year, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called on the Congolese government to swiftly investigate the killings and bring the perpetrators to justice. It's still not clear when the trial will begin. Chris Chamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Tonga continues to see improvements in its communication lines after Saturday's tsunami severely damaged the undersea communications cable linking the country to the rest of the world. Telecom operator Digicel said its international telephone connectivity had been restored. The Prime Minister's office says satellite phones have allowed for some communication. Internet connectivity, however, will likely take weeks or even longer to return. Meanwhile, the UN relief officials say Tongan authorities have removed a thick coat of ash from an international runway, paving the way for the arrival of emergency aid. It means Tonga could receive flights from Australia and New Zealand from Thursday. With clean water a concern, the government is advising people to only drink bottled water. Zhao Yongmin, an employee of China's Civil Engineering Construction Corporation in Tonga, describes what he saw after Saturday's volcanic eruption.
I was at our project site with my co-workers when the volcano erupted. The project site is close to the Tonga International Airport. We felt a strong shock wave and the glass windows of our office were shaking. Some of them broke. We looked up and saw clouds from the volcano fanning out. Half an hour later, we received an alert from the Chinese embassy in Tonga. It warned us that the eruption could cause a tsunami. They asked us to evacuate and stay away from the coastline. We quickly evacuated from our project site. Some of my co-workers took shelters at our camp in higher ground. Others went to the downtown camp to guarantee supplies.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson on Wednesday suffered an embarrassing defection from his Conservative Party over revelations of lockdown breaching events in Downing Street. Johnson has, however, vowed to fight on, as told by our London correspondent Naweed Jabakil.
Prime Minister's Questions is a weekly occurrence here in the UK, but this one was action-packed. Moments before it got underway, one of Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister's own colleagues, decided to get up from his seat, cross over the House and sit on the opposition benches. Christian Wakeford, a lawmaker from near Manchester in the north of England, has decided to step down from the Conservative Party and defect to Labour. It was a big blow for the Prime Minister, and throughout Prime Minister's Questions he faced a lot of questions about what's come to be known as Partygate, these allegations of illegal parties potentially taking place at Downing Street. The messaging from the Prime Minister, he says that we need to wait for the results of an investigation that's currently being looked into, run by a senior civil servant within Downing Street. Keir Starmer, the leader of opposition, asked the Prime Minister again and again about whether he knew, how much he knew about these parties and whether he attended some of them. What isn't helping Boris Johnson's case is the mixed messaging that's coming out from Number 10. Initially it said that no parties had taken place. A video then emerged in December showing staff joking about the issue at one party, which led to the resignation of one of his most senior advisors. Now there are lots of other allegations of parties taking place, perhaps a culture problem within Downing Street, and calls for responsibility from the Prime Minister. One person who was looking for responsibility was David Davis, the former Brexit minister, one of Boris Johnson's own former Brexit ministers, standing up and saying it was time for Boris Johnson to resign. This is what he had to say: "In the name of God, go." That may propel some others in the party, in the Conservative Party, to decide to join those calls for Boris Johnson to resign, but it's not clear yet whether that will happen. In terms of the logistics of it and the protocol, 54 Conservative lawmakers or members of Parliament will have to write to the 1922 committee calling for a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister. There are reports here in the UK media that that could be reached, but even if it is, there's no indication that Boris Johnson would lose a vote of no confidence, because despite all of the controversy following him in recent months, this is a Prime Minister who's overseen a very successful vaccination programme here in the UK. The pandemic does remain a challenge, and the Conservative Party won't be wanting to look for its fourth leader since 2016, particularly with local elections set to come up in May. But one thing is for sure, whatever happens, this is going to leave a stain on Boris Johnson's legacy when he eventually does decide to leave Downing Street. Naweed Jabakil, CGTN, London.
U.S. President Joe Biden is expected to hold a news conference later to mark 1 year in office. Biden will reflect on a rocky road in his first year. His administration is facing calls from public health experts to distribute high-quality masks to the American public. The 46th president is expected to announce that his administration is making 400 million non-surgical N95 masks available free of charge. The White House says in a statement that the shipping of the masks to pharmacies and health centers will begin at the end of the week. CGTN's John Terrett now joins us live from Washington, D.C. for more on this. John, Biden set out his presidential mission statement, bringing America together, uniting our people and uniting our nation. So a year on, how is that plea for national unity going?
Well, there is an awful lot to be said about the first year of Joe Biden's presidency. He, I think, would agree himself that it's been mixed. He's had some successes, but as for bringing the country together, I'm afraid this is such a partisan country that is probably impossible for almost any president these days. And my assessment of it is that Joe Biden hasn't achieved it. Let me run through a couple of his successes, and then I'll point out some of the things that have not gone right for him. For example, back in March, the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan Act was signed into law. This was a success for the president in the early days of his presidency because it sought to speed up the recovery of the U.S. economy after the COVID-19 hit and to mitigate economic and health issues regarding COVID. And it provided direct payments into Americans' bank accounts. It also extended things like unemployment benefit for those who were without a job at the time, and it extended rent assistance as well, some of which has only just run out in the last couple of months. His really big success, in my view, was the $1.1 trillion infrastructure bill. Now, this is a separate bill. It was signed into law by the president in November, and this one seeks to provide money for, and along with that money, jobs all over the country to repair America's struggling infrastructure, things like roads and bridges and ports of entry, airports, and even broadband, because America has a lot in common with parts of Africa where people have no broadband access whatsoever. And this bill is designed to try and alleviate some of that. So those two things are two of the successes that he's had. And I would tell you regarding infrastructure, many presidents in the past have tried to deal with America's crumbling infrastructure, and he actually got it done. So those two things are a success, the rescue plan and the infrastructure plan. But his signature issue is what they call the BBB, the Build Back Better bill, which is a social infrastructure program designed to provide help for childcare, climate change, welfare, parental leave, and all that sort of stuff. It was whittled down from $3.5 billion to $1.75 billion, and it still hasn't passed. And I could bore you with the details of why it hasn't passed. I won't do that, but just understand it has not passed, and time is running out because we move into election season come April for the midterm congressional elections. There's a voting rights bill working its way through Congress. There are two of them as well, passed by the House, working its way through the Senate at the moment, designed, according to Biden, to make it easier for all people in the country to vote and to block attempts in mostly Republican states to prevent people from voting. But it's not going to pass. So it's already, they're debating it, but it's dead in the water. And on top of that, of course, there's the Afghan exit, which was seen as a debacle and chaotic. There are issues still regarding the southern border with people coming over into the southern states from Mexico. His handling of COVID has been mixed. He missed the winter surge. And all of these things are up for debate now as we move into election season with the midterm congressional elections slated for this November. So a mixed year, I think, is the way to put it.
And John, it appears that over the past 12 months, tensions have escalated over long-standing points of divergence in the U.S. Is this a fair statement?
Oh, I think so. And it's going to be very interesting to see what the president actually says when he speaks in about 4 hours' time, 4 o'clock local time here, 21 hours GMT. But the thing is, you have to remember, Peninah, this is a highly partisan country, more so, I think, than almost any other country. You are either a Republican or you are a Democrat. And yes, there are swing voters, but they only oscillate between the two parties. And that's part of the issue here. Biden does have some things, though, that he can talk up as major achievements. I mean, chief among them is not being Donald Trump. And I say that remembering all the time that lots of people in this country do still support Donald Trump. Of course, a lot don't. But he is not Donald Trump, and he can claim to have returned some dignity and some honor and some certainty to the White House, which may have been lacking under the previous president. He can also claim to have put handling of the pandemic firmly and squarely back into the court of the experts like Dr. Anthony Fauci, and indeed 75% of Americans have now had at least one dose of the vaccine. I realize people in Africa will be agog at that because I know lots of people in Africa have not even had one. But anyway, 75% here. He's also appointed 40 judges, which is more than we've seen appointed in the first year since I think Ronald Reagan back in the 80s. And he's also done a lot to help students with loan issues as well. So those are all successes. But here's the problem. He is not a natural live question and answer performer. You know, he has a stammer. He's had it for years. He's not fluent. He's not an Obama, and he's not a Reagan. So this is a big issue, and I think his handlers are very worried about how he will actually handle impromptu questions from the journalistic community. I think a lot of it's going to be on the auto cue in front of him to help him. And to round this off, I think you do have to remember the man is 79 years old, and already, I will tell you, there is speculation that he will not run again in 2024 when the next presidential election comes up. And I back that up by telling you that Michelle Obama, Barack Obama's wife, spent $100,000 on a full-page advert in the New York Times a couple of weekends ago. Only one reason she would do that, to attract attention to herself with a possible run in mind. We know that Hillary Clinton is fundraising again, and we know that Donald Trump is almost certain to run again in 2024 and probably get his party's nomination, still fuming from the results of 2020. So I think, you know, at the end of year one, there's a lot riding on this press conference with Joe Biden. And as I say, it comes up in about 4 hours from now. Peninah?
All right, John. And I also noticed, John, that you are in New York and not Washington, D.C. Apologies for that mix-up. Thank you very much for those insights, John Terrett, live for us in New York. This is Africa Live. Let's take a short break coming up. Schools reopen in Zamfara State after 4 months of closure due to spate of kidnappings. And the WHO says the COVID-19 pandemic is far from over as it warns against easing vigilance.
So this is it. I'm just about to be shot.
The little tents here, bottles are being thrown as they do so.
There are about 3 critical bridges here in Malawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
Tear gas, so it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
This is the front line now after 9 days of fighting.
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from the front
clear
line.
view of this front line position.
The World Health Organization has emphasized the need to scale up COVID-19 vaccination programs, saying that vaccines are still key in preventing healthcare systems from being overwhelmed. The World Health Body warned that the pandemic is far from over and new variants are still likely to emerge. The WHO on Friday recommended 2 new drugs for COVID-19, providing yet more options for treating the disease. Okista Nyabwa reports.
As of 13th January 2022, 36 out of 194 WHO member states had vaccinated less than 10% of their population against COVID-19. 88 other countries had made more progress, but their vaccinated populations still fell under the 40% mark. And as the Omicron variant of COVID-19 continues to spread, the World Health Organization is calling attention to the need to scale up COVID-19 vaccination rates.
In some countries, cases seem to have peaked, which gives hope that the worst of this latest wave is done with, but no country is out of the woods yet. Make no mistake, Omicron is causing hospitalizations and deaths, And even the less severe cases are inundating health facilities.
The World Health Body continues to warn against easing measures taken to protect the public, saying the battle is not yet won.
Across all of the vaccines, high levels of protection against severe disease. That's the outcome we're most interested in, protection against death. Against Omicron, many of the vaccines have shown a reduction in efficacy against infection. And that's why we see a lot of breakthrough infections, but these are mostly not resulting in severe disease.
The WHO recommended 2 new drugs, providing yet more options for treating the disease, sharing new information on the breakthrough science and increasing access to drugs, scientists note, is vital in the fight against the disease.
This is a dangerous virus, but there is hope out there because we can reduce severe disease and death significantly with earlier clinical care, with vaccines that are reaching those who are most at risk around the world. This won't be the last variant of concern. So now is the time to support and invest in the surveillance system.
Scientists and policymakers are working with leaders and healthcare workers across the world toward achieving the target of vaccinating 70% of populations by July 2022. Wilkis Anyawo, CGTN.
Since South Africa's return to democracy in 1994, it's become an attractive option for migrants. It's the most industrialized economy on the continent, boasting well-developed infrastructure and services. Despite sporadic flare-ups of xenophobic violence, tens of thousands still seek refuge in the country every year. CGTN's Julie Shire has more.
Johannesburg's Methodist Church has run a refugee center for over 2 decades. Moses Peninah found himself on the doorstep after crossing into South Africa illegally from Zimbabwe in 2010. He came in search of a better education and economic opportunities.
You know, before you go to school, everything in front of you looks like it's dark. Like in my case, I failed. So they take me to school. I spent 3 years during my high school. Then when I finished my high school in 2012, the Methodist stops there. They don't stop giving you accommodation, but they don't pay for your tertiary.
Tens of thousands of asylum seekers like Peninah enter South Africa every year. The local Home Affairs Department has struggled to keep up with the influx.
So what you have is a continued number of people applying for asylum, for example, who really should be applying for work permits or other ways of coming into the South African labor economy. This, again, is not because there's too many immigrants. It's rather that the system is not designed to deal with the immigration patterns that we have.
Those who do migrate successfully help boost the local economy with little demand on social infrastructure.
Immigrants who are here are working. They are contributing. They pay VAT just like everybody else. They create jobs at a higher rate than the average person. So on aggregate, almost all of the economic analysis suggests that immigrants contribute economically to the fiscus, to the tax base, and they take very little in terms of schools, in terms of other services.
South Africa is home to the most amount of immigrants on the continent. Close to 3 million people not born in this country call it home. While unemployment soars and economic opportunities dry up, it's still viewed as a land of opportunity. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Children in Nigeria have been badly affected by the growing insecurity in parts of the country. The UN Children's Agency, UNICEF, says Nigeria has one of the highest rates of abductions in Africa. Other African countries on that UN list are Somalia, the Democratic Republic of Congo and Cameroon. CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam reports.
Donley Oka-Julie used to head the Nigerian anti-trafficking agency, NAPTIP. She spent years combating human trafficking crimes and grave violations against children in the country. She has now set up the Roost Foundation to provide support for victims of human trafficking as well as sexual and gender-based violence. Donley and her team have set up platforms for reporting and tracking cases of crimes against children.
We give support, medical support to victims of
either SGBV or human trafficking. We also give psychosocial support. We give legal support. We actually file civil litigation cases against perpetrators on behalf of victims pro bono. We have our website with all our available numbers, help numbers. We've had a lot of people call us.
The threats of abductions, sexual violence, and other forms of violence against children is a growing concern in Nigeria, as recent data by the UN's Children's Agency, UNICEF, shows that there's been an alarming increase in confirmed cases across Africa. There's been a more than 50% rise in abductions and a 10% increase in cases of sexual violence against children. According to Save the Children International, from January to August of 2021, over 1,000 children were abducted in Nigeria, with so many of them still in the hands of their abductors.
Abducting anyone, whether adults or children, is a very, very traumatic experience, and when children are concerned, it even makes it worse.
And advocates like Donley believe that the responsibility of protecting children shouldn't be left in the hands of government alone.
The organized private sector has not done much. They've been missing in action. The faith-based organizations too also must latch onto this fight and do a lot. On the part of government, we have NAPTIP. NAPTIP is an agency that is mandated to fight crimes of human trafficking. We have the Humanitarian Affairs Ministry that is also doing a lot in terms of the IDP camps and the Refugee Commission and all of that.
It's been more than 30 years since countries across the world adopted the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. Nigeria passed the Child Rights Act in 2003. The act deals with a range of threats that children might face, including child labor and other forms of exploitative practices. But only about 25 or 36 states have adopted the act, and advocates continue to push for full implementation of the UN Children's Convention. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Meanwhile, in Nigeria's Zamfara state, schools reopened on Monday after 4 months of closure. The local government in the northern state had ordered schools to be closed in September last year, following abduction of about 80 students at a secondary school. According to authorities, the reopening will see the resumption of learning in 115 schools. However, 85 learning institutions will remain closed until security improves. Criminal activities, including kidnappings, looting, and ambush on villages, have been rampant in northwestern and central Nigeria. The United Nations says about 1,500 school children were seized in 20 kidnapping episodes, while 16 died.
It has fallen the academic of students backward, so we are pleading to parents to assist we the teachers and to help their pupils, send them back to school. School has really resumed, so we have to catch up with what we have lost in our back previous holiday we have got. It has really affected our academic calendar because we are trying to catch up with those that we have left aside. So we are trying to put something together so that we can continue with the academic calendar the way it is.
There is nobody known that this thing will happen. So we are praying for that, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect them.
In South Sudan, the Chinese embassy has donated school bags and stationery to support students affected by flooding in the East African country. 3 years of heavy rains led to flooding, destroying more than 200 schools across the country, and the government is struggling to provide educational materials and infrastructure. And as CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports, China has also donated protective materials and equipment to help fight COVID-19 in South Sudan.
The Chinese embassy in South Sudan says the donation of school bags comprising various learning supplies is from China Foundation for Poverty Alleviation. China is also building a number of schools in South Sudan. Beijing is also providing training for teachers as well as providing scholarships for South Sudanese students to study in China.
Education is of vital significance. As Chinese President Xi Jinping said, education determines the present and the future of mankind. A country will be strong if its education prospers. Education must be given priorities.
China has provided millions of textbooks to South Sudan's education ministry over the past 10 years. However, South Sudan's government says a lot of teaching materials were damaged by flooding, adding that it still needs more support for the country's education sector. 6 out of 10 states in South Sudan are affected by flooding. The UN ranks South Sudan among countries with the least developed educational infrastructure, and the literacy rate stands at 27%. South Sudan's government says it is working with countries like China to try and develop the education sector.
We are the same people in different countries because our culture, we have culture of hospitality. We have culture of telling the truth, and we have culture of helping each other. And that is why we have this very important scholastic materials.
And it wasn't just educational materials that were donated by China. It also gave 12,000 face masks, disinfectants, children's shoes, and 35 oxygen generators to help South Sudan fight COVID-19. Patrick Koyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
You're watching Africa Live. Time now to catch up with the day's business news. Let's cross over to Ucha for the latest.
Thanks, Peninah. And coming up on Africa Live is oil prices hit a 7-year high as an outage in Turkey tightened supply. And the cost of living in South Africa rises to a near 5-year high at a rate of 5.9%.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues for taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, let's start off with commodity markets. Oil prices rose for a fourth day after a fire at a pipeline from Iraq to Turkey briefly stopped flows. Now, this is now increasing concerns about an already tight short-term supply outlook. The explosion that set off the fire on the pipeline in the southeastern Turkish province of Kahramanmaraş was caused by a falling power pylon and not an attack. Now, Brent crude futures were up 81 cents or 0.9% to $88.32 a barrel. The benchmark contract earlier touched $89.05, its highest since 2014. Oil flows resumed earlier on Wednesday through the Kirkuk-Ceyhan pipeline that carries crude from northern Iraq, the second largest producer in the Organization of the Petroleum of Exporting Countries, to the Turkish port of Ceyhan for export. Well, heading to South Africa now, the country's inflation rate rose to a near 5-year high of 5.9%, and that's compared with 5.5% in November. That's according to data from the country's statistics office. Inflation, which was stoked by near record high fuel prices and rising food costs, has now breached 4.5% for 8 consecutive months. The rate moved closer to the top of the central bank's target range of 3 to 6%. Now, the December reading brought the average inflation rate for 2021 to 4.5%. That matches the central bank's estimate published at its November Monetary Policy Committee meeting. And still in South Africa, where mining output rose 5.2% year-on-year in November 2021, it was boosted by a 38% rise in the production of platinum group metals. But as Angelo Coppola now reports, the overall production tally was dragged down for the 5th consecutive month by coal.
Mineral sales at current prices increased by 22.2%. Here, platinum group metal prices were up 34.4%, gold was up 59.7% and coal was up 29.7%. Iron ore was down 14.5% during the month.
We will probably grow at about 12%, 21, full year. So that brings us back to where we were in 2019. So it dug us out of the minus 12 of last year, which is not completely unexpected. We're struggling to maintain a certain level, but one thing that worries me a little bit is the fact that we're not really doing better than the averages of 2019. So pre-lockdown average production.
Generally, shareholders in mining stocks in South Africa are more than happy. Revenues and profits have jumped. Platinum group metals miners felt some pressure. That's set to change. Iron ore is also a concern.
The general expectation this year is for car production to pick back up, which should be supportive of PGM prices and therefore the miners. And so we should see that in some of the share prices for that sector. If you look at iron ore, which is a very important commodity for our market, we've come off of very high highs in 2021. So iron ore was above $200. We're currently at about $130. China just reported fourth quarter numbers, and it was a bit challenging. They have cut rates to try to stimulate the economy, and it looks like fixed asset investment has come under pressure. So to cut a long story short, iron ore I think might be a bit more of a challenging commodity or space to be in.
On a local level, electricity self-generation is being considered by most miners. Applications for licenses have jumped from 1.9 gigawatts to 3.9 gigawatts. The private sector are also getting involved in other areas, like security of logistics.
You will be surprised that there's been a lot of intervention, if I can call it that, by the private sector on security, on the coal line specifically. And there's quite a debate going on about what we could do for chrome. So, and that has improved. It's not completely sorted out, but it has improved. It's now more about the spares for the locomotives and whatever. And the private sector are actually involved in that as well. They're trying to use their own supply chains to actually help Eskom.
The South African mining sector is characterized by high commodity prices but low production levels, and that's an issue that's got to be resolved quite soon, and it seems like the private sector are getting involved. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
And now to some good news for trade in Kenya. The Ports Authority says a positive performance last year signals the continued recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic period. Now, according to a recently released report from the authority, the coastal port of Mombasa recorded marginal growth in cargo volumes. Volumes grew 1.2% compared to 2020, while container traffic improved 5.5%. The authority also says the 2021 container traffic performance surpassed both 2020 and 2019 performances. The pandemic, of course, had seriously affected many ports around the world after it disrupted the global supply chain, reducing international trade. And Tanzania and Burundi have signed an agreement to build a railway that will connect the two nations at a cost of around $900 million. The railway is the final part of a 2.561-kilometer standard gauge railway that, of course, is being built by Tanzania to boost trade in the region. Here's CGTN's Isaac Lukando with more.
The 282-kilometer long railway line will connect Tanzania's northwestern town of Uvinza and the capital city of Gitega in central Burundi. A 156-kilometer section will be built in Tanzania, with the remaining stretch built in Burundi. Once complete, over 1 million tons of cargo and around 3 million tons of minerals are expected to be transported on the line every year. The line will help Tanzania's other landlocked neighbors like Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo to get easier access to the port of Dar es Salaam. following the signing of the agreement to build the line, the next few months will be spent looking for a suitable contractor to execute the project. Financing for the construction remains a challenge, but both governments say they are confident in their ability to secure funding for the project. Last month, Tanzania signed an agreement with Turkish construction company Yapı Merkezi to begin work on a 368-kilometer section of the same railway line at a cost of $1.9 billion. Isaac Lukando, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Well, let's head to Egypt now. The country is seeking to formalize its massive informal economy, which constitutes about 50% of its workforce. Now, data from the International Monetary Fund shows the informal economy is at its highest in African and Latin American countries, where it accounts for an average of 40% of the total economy. Well, as Yasser Hakim now reports, authorities in Cairo have introduced incentives to encourage people to join the formal sector of the economy.
State Statistics Agency CAPMAS says Egypt has relatively the largest informal sector in the Middle East and North Africa, accounting for about 34.5% of the total economy and employing over half the total workforce in the country.
The informal sector accounts for about 2 to 4 trillion Egyptian pounds, which is about 60% of Egypt's budget. It's a burden as this segment's tax evasion is estimated at about 1.4 trillion Egyptian pounds annually because of the fear from the complicated tax system, and this puts a strain on the economy and curtails development efforts.
Having a large shadow economy also opens the door for illegal activity, such as child labor, money laundering and drug trafficking. That is why the government has set up a new plan to encourage thousands of medium and small enterprises to move from the shadow economy to the formal sector. Wala Goma is one of those targeted segments. She established her small outlet that sells clothes and female accessories produced by women in their homes or small workshops.
We started with a small workshop, me and 5 other women. Now we have a store and the workshop is growing. I learned from an NGO initiative how to produce leather products like small bags and wallets. We advertise for free using social media through relatives and friends, and we're planning to expand and export abroad.
The ladies produce small amounts with their limited capabilities. Paying taxes and fees will cut into the minute profits they make. But the government's plan is to attract such businesses with promises of growth.
We cannot force these businesses to merge into the economy, so the government has offered incentives such as facilitating the issuance of licenses, consultancy services, easier access to bank accounts, offering low-interest long-term loans, and fintech services like mobile wallets to transfer money or take instant loans. The state also provides tax incentives or even tax exemptions, in some cases to encourage these small businesses to merge into small financial system.
Wala and her partners are now registering their small project after the latest incentives.
All women face a tough problem that we need to spend from the profit on advertisements on social media to grow, but it's a bit costly. These are housewives who cannot afford to pay out from the small income they make. The project is from our own capital, as we are unable to get loans from the state. But now that we are going formal, we will apply for loans.
This is all part of a comprehensive Sustained Development Goals strategy by the North African country to eradicate the shadow economy by 2030. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Well, that's all for now on Africa Live Biz, but coming up later on Global Business Africa, the International Monetary Fund is now urging public and private creditors to complete a renegotiation of Chad's loans by the end of March. We'll be discussing this further at the top of the hour. For now, back to you.
Thank you, Uche. You're watching Africa Live. Coming up in sports. The Egyptian Pharaohs take on Sudan in crucial last Group D match.